Do you remember pumping the gas pedal twice before turning the key? Driving in the 1970s demanded skills and rituals that nobody under 50 has ever experienced. Today, we're exploring 25 things only people who drove 1970s cars remember. Buckle up, and with a lap belt, of course. Let's start with pumping the gas pedal before turning the key. Every carbureted car had its own personality, and you had to learn it like a dance partner. On a cold morning, you'd press the accelerator once, maybe twice, to set the automatic choke and squirt raw fuel into the intake. Too little, and the engine would crank and crank without catching. Too much, and you'd flood it. And then the whole neighborhood could smell the gasoline while you sat there, foot to the floor, waiting it out. Some cars wanted one pump and a held pedal. Others wanted two quick stabs and a prayer. Dads passed these recipes down to their kids like family secrets. Fuel injection was still an exotic European curiosity in the early 70s, found on cars like the Volkswagen Type 3 and a few Volvos, so nearly every American driveway held a machine that required this morning ritual. Today, you push a button and the computer does the thinking. Back then, starting the car was the first test of your day. Vent, windows, those little triangular panes at the front of the door glass might be the single most missed feature in automotive history. Vent windows, some folks called them wing windows or quarter windows, pivoted on a vertical post, and you could angle them to scoop a stream of fresh air directly at your face without the roar and buffeting of an open window. On the highway, they were nature's air conditioning. Smokers loved them because they pulled cigarette smoke straight out of the cabin. And plenty of drivers of a certain generation will quietly admit they were also the way you got into your own car when you locked the keys inside. A little pressure in the right spot and you were in. As factory air conditioning spread through the 70s and automakers chased cleaner aerodynamics and lower costs, the vent window slowly vanished, mostly gone from new designs by the 80s. Ask anyone who had them, they'd trade a touchscreen for vent windows tomorrow. The floor-mounted high-beam switch. Here's one that separates the generations instantly. In a 1970s car, you didn't flick a stalk to switch on your brights. You stomped a little chrome button on the floor, up and to the left of the brake pedal with your left foot. Click, high beams on, click again, back to low. It was a beautifully simple piece of engineering that had been standard since the 1920s, and your left foot found it by pure muscle memory on dark country roads. It also collected its share of mud, snow, and spilled coffee down there, which is part of why engineers eventually moved the function to the turn signal stalk, following the import's lead through the late 70s and early 80s. Drivers who grew up with the floor switch spent years afterwards stomping at empty carpet in newer cars. And to this day, if you put one of them in a 70s sedan, that left foot still knows exactly where to go. 8-track players. Before playlists, before CDs, before cassettes took over, there was the mighty 8-track, a plastic brick, the size of a sandwich that you shoved into the dash until it clunked. Ford had offered factory 8-track players since 1966, and by the early 70s, they were the must-have option in everything from Mustangs to Winnebagos. The sound was warm, the selection was huge, and the quirks were unforgettable. Tapes had 4 programs, and the player would switch between them with a loud mechanical K-chunk, sometimes right in the middle of your favorite song, splitting it in two. Tapes left on the dashboard warped in the summer sun, and every 8-track owner remembers the folded matchbook wedged under a sagging cartridge to fix the wobbly playback. By the late 70s, the smaller cassette was winning the war, and the 8-track was mostly gone from new cars by 1982. But that K-chunk sound, that's pure 1975, and everyone who heard it just smiled. Front bench seats. Cars in the 70s didn't seat 5, they seated 6 because the front seat was a sofa. A full-width bench with a column shifter meant 3 across in front, and it meant something else too. Your sweetheart could slide all the way over and ride pressed up against your shoulder, no console in the way. There's a reason people joke that bucket seats and center consoles did more damage to young romance than any curfew ever did. Bench seats also made the family car endlessly practical. Grandma in the middle up front, groceries stretched across the back, nobody fighting over armrests because there weren't any. The big sedans from Chevrolet, Ford, and Plymouth nearly all came this way, often in velour or vinyl with a fold-down center armrest for when you were riding alone. Buckets and consoles gradually took over as sporty interiors became the fashion. And the last true front bench in an American car didn't disappear until decades later. But nothing since has ever felt as friendly. Hand crank windows, roll down the window. We still say it, but almost nobody actually rolls anything anymore. In the 70s, every door had a crank handle, and lowering the glass was an honest bit of exercise. About 4 full rotations of the arm, more if the mechanism was stiff. Power windows existed, but they were a luxury option on Cadillacs, Lincolns, and loaded Oldsmobiles, often costing over $100 extra at a time when that was real money. So the rest of America cranked. Kids in the back seat cranked the windows up and down until Dad barked at them to knock it off. The driver leaned way across the passenger seat, arms stretched to its limit, to crank down the far window at the drive-through bank, and every family had at least one car where a crank handle had popped off its splined shaft, leaving you to carry it in the glove box and slip it on whenever you needed air. Simple, unbreakable, and completely gone. Scorching vinyl seats in summer. If you drove a 1970s car in July, you remember the pain. Vinyl upholstery was everywhere, cheap, durable, easy to wipe down, and in a parking lot on a 90-degree day, it turned into a frying pan. Sliding in wearing shorts produced a hiss you could practically hear, and everyone developed the same technique. Open the door, wave it a few times, sit on your hands, or lay a beach towel down like a protective blanket. The metal seatbelt buckles were even worse. Genuine branding irons that left their mark on more than a few thighs. Factory air conditioning was still an expensive option that plenty of families skipped. So the summer routine was windows down, vents open, and endure. Some folks bought those beaded seat covers or wide wale fabric throws just to survive August. Kids today will never know the specific bravery of climbing into a closed-up Impala after 3 hours at the lake. You didn't sit down in that car. You lowered yourself in, an inch at a time. Full-service gas stations. You didn't pump your own gas in the early 70s. You rolled over a rubber hose that went ding-ding, and a man in a uniform came out to do everything. Fill her up with regular. While the tank filled, he'd wash your windshield, check your oil, and eyeball your tire pressure, all included in the price of the gas, which before the 1973 embargo ran around 36 cents a gallon. Stations competed for your loyalty with giveaways, drinking glasses, steak knives, S&H green stamps, and free road maps in the rack by the register. The Texaco Man, the Sinclair Dinosaur, the Flying Red Pegasus, these were fixtures of every American town. Self-service pumps spread rapidly through the 70s as stations cut costs during the fuel crises. And by the 80s, the full-service island was an endangered species everywhere except New Jersey and Oregon. Did your family have a station they swore by and a favorite attendant who knew your car by sound? Tell us in the comments and tell us what part of the country you grew up in. Gas lines and odd-even rationing. And then came October 1973, when the OPEC oil embargo turned filling the tank into a national ordeal. Overnight, gas jumped from around 36 cents toward 55 cents a gallon, and worse than the price was the scarcity. Lines of cars stretched around the block before dawn. Stations flew colored flags. Green meant they had gas. Red meant they were dry. Many states adopted odd-even rationing. If your license plate ended in an odd number, you could buy fuel only on odd-numbered days. People topped off half-full tanks out of pure anxiety, which made the shortages worse. Tempers flared, fistfights broke out in line, and some stations posted armed guards. Then, just when everyone had recovered, it happened all over again in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution. If you drove in the 70s, you remember exactly which day of the week was your gas day, and you remember the sinking feeling of seeing that line snake around the corner. Filling up has never felt so precious since. CB radios. Breaker 19, this here's the rubber duck. For a few glorious years, in the mid-70s, America went completely crazy for Citizens Band radio. What started as a trucker's tool for dodging speed traps during the new 55-mile-per-hour limit exploded into a full-blown national fad. C.W. McCall's Song Convoy hit number 1 in 1976, Smokey and the Bandit filled theaters in 1977, and suddenly every station wagon and Pinto had a whip antenna and a handset under the dash. Demand grew so fast that the FCC expanded the band from 23 channels to 40 in 1977. Everyone had a handle, your CB nickname, and a working vocabulary. Smokey meant police. A bear in the air was a police plane, and 10-4 meant understood. Families used them on vacation to talk between cars. It was social media at 55 miles per hour, decades before anyone said the words. The fad faded by the 80s, but ask anyone their old handle. They'll remember it instantly and probably grin. Vinyl and Landau roofs, nothing says 1970s like a padded vinyl roof. The look was meant to evoke a classic convertible top, and Detroit slathered it on everything. Full vinyl roofs, half roofs, and the famous Landau top covering just the rear section, often dressed up with fake chrome Landau bars. Buyers paid roughly $100 extra for the privilege, and it was worth every penny for the touch of class it added to a Monte Carlo, a Cordoba, or a Ford LTD. Colors got adventurous too, white vinyl over a burgundy body, green over green, even paisley patterns on some mod tops. The problem revealed itself a decade later. Vinyl trapped moisture against the steel, and under every peeling, bubbled roof was a blooming patch of rust. Mechanics came to dread them. Aerodynamics and changing tastes killed the vinyl roof through the 80s, and nobody has seriously tried to bring it back. But in 1976, pulling into church with a fresh Landau top, you had arrived. Curb feelers. Here's one the kids will never believe. Little spring steel whiskers mounted low on the passenger side of the car, sticking out a few inches, whose entire job was to scrape against the curb and make a scritching sound before your white walls or hubcaps did. Curb feelers were the parking sensors of their day. No beeps, no cameras, just physics and a noise you learn to listen for. They cost a couple of dollars at the auto parts store, installed in minutes with a clamp, and they were especially beloved by drivers of big cars with long overhangs, where the right front corner might as well have been in another zip code. Cadillac and Lincoln owners protecting expensive wire wheel covers swore by them. They also became a signature of lovingly kept cruisers, right alongside the tissue box on the rear shelf. As cars shrank and wheels got tougher, curb feelers quietly disappeared, but that delicate screech sound saved $1 million worth of white walls in its day. Rear-facing station wagon seats. If you were a kid in the 70s, the best seat in the house was the way back, the rear-facing third seat in the family station wagon. Ford's big wagons offered dual-facing rear seats. Chevrolet's Kingswood Estate had its own version, and from that rear perch, you watched the world unspool backwards, made faces at truckers, and pumped your arm until they blasted the air horn. There were usually no headrests, often lap belts at best, and nobody thought twice about it. On long trips, parents folded the seats flat, threw down sleeping bags, and let the kids sprawl loose across the cargo floor from Ohio to Florida. The way back was its own private country out of parental arm's reach, with rules and games all its own. Minivans and SUVs eventually killed the great American wagon, and safety standards ended rear-facing seats for good. But everyone who rode back there remembers it as the closest thing childhood offered to first class. If these are bringing the memories flooding back, you are exactly who we make these for. Do us one small favor and subscribe so the next trip down memory lane finds you. That is all we ask. Now back to it. Ashtrays and lighters everywhere. Cars in the 70s were built around the assumption that everybody smoked because, well, most everybody did. The dashboard had a push-in electric lighter that popped out glowing orange, and kids were endlessly fascinated by it, usually right up until they touched the coil. But it didn't stop there. Full-size sedans had ashtrays for every passenger, one sliding out of the dash, one in each rear door or armrest, sometimes 6 in a single car. Luxury models even put lighters in the back seat. The ashtray was also the family coin bank, holding toll change, gum wrappers, and the odd hairpin, especially in the households that didn't smoke. As smoking declined, the ashtray shrank, became a delete option, and finally vanished. The lighter socket surviving only because it turned out to be perfect for powering radar detectors and phone chargers. Today, it's a USB port, and no dashboard part will ever again be as dangerous, as glamorous, or as strangely beloved as that glowing coil. AM-only radios. The soundtrack of 70s driving came out of a single dashboard speaker in glorious mono, courtesy of the AM band. FM radio existed, but an AM-FM unit was an extra cost option many buyers skipped, so millions of cars rolled out with AM only. 2 chrome knobs, 5 mechanical preset buttons you'd punch with a satisfying clack, and a dial you nudged by hand to chase the signal. Top 40 AM stations ruled the airwaves, with larger-than-life DJs and jingles everyone knew by heart. At night, the magic happened. Powerful clear channel stations like WLS out of Chicago or WABC in New York skipped off the atmosphere, and you could pull in a ball game from 500 miles away, drifting in and out like a ghost. Passing under a bridge silenced everything for a second. FM's stereo sound finally overtook AM in listenership by the end of the decade, and the old band was left to talk and news, but those crackling one-speaker summer nights sounded better than they had any right to. Chrome bumpers. Before bumpers became painted plastic that shatters if you look at it wrong, they were gleaming chrome steel. Massive, heavy, and proud. And in 1973, the federal government made them mighty. New standards required bumpers to withstand 5-mile-per-hour impacts without damage to safety equipment, so Detroit bolted on huge girders with rubber-tip bumper guards, sometimes riding on hydraulic shock absorbers. They added real weight, often well over 100 pounds per car, and stylists hated them, but they could take a parking lot tap and shrug it off completely. A minor fender bender that totals a modern bumper cover would leave a 74 Impala without a scratch. Polishing the chrome was part of every Saturday wash ritual, and a mirror-bright bumper was a point of pride. The standards relaxed in 1982, plastics took over for weight and aerodynamics, and chrome retreated into memory. Everyone who owned one remembers this. You could sit on a 70s bumper, stand on it, even tow with it. Try that today? Hood ornaments. There was a time when your car announced itself with a piece of jewelry standing proudly at the tip of the hood. The 70s were the last great age of the hood ornament. Cadillac's wreath and crest, Lincoln's four-pointed star framed in chrome, the leaping Greyhound spirit revived on customs, and stand-up ornaments even on mid-priced cars like the Ford Granada and Chrysler Cordoba, some of them lit or set in crystal-look plastic. Sighting down the hood, that little sculpture was your gun sight for keeping the car centered in the lane. With hoods that long, you needed a landmark. They were also, sadly, irresistible to thieves and teenage collectors, which is why so many were mounted on springs that let them bend and snap back. Pedestrian safety rules and aerodynamic styling doomed the standing ornament, and today, only a couple of holdouts remain in the world. Which car on this list would you bring back tomorrow if you could? We read every single comment, the 1974 seatbelt interlock. Here's one drivers remember with a groan. For the 1974 model year, the federal government required a seatbelt ignition interlock. The car simply would not start until the driver, and even a front passenger or a heavy bag of groceries on the seat, buckled up. America revolted. The systems were glitchy, they stranded people in parking lots, and the sight of a grown man buckling a sack of dog food into the passenger seat just to get home became a national joke. The public outcry was so fierce that Congress acted with rare speed, and by late 1974, the interlock mandate was repealed, replaced by the more polite warning buzzer and light. It remains one of the shortest-lived safety mandates in American history. Plenty of 70s drivers also remember the workaround, buckling the belt behind you and sitting on it, or having your mechanic quietly bypass the whole system. Seatbelts eventually won the argument. But in 1974, they lost the battle badly. White wall tires. Nothing dressed up a car like a crisp ring of white rubber. White wall tires had been an American status symbol since the 30s, and through the 70s, they remained the finishing touch on any respectable sedan. Narrower now than the wide whites of the 50s, but still standard fitment on Cadillacs, Lincolns, and every grandmother's Delta 88. Keeping them white was a genuine chore and a point of honor. Every garage had a bottle of white wall cleaner and a stiff brush, and Wesley's Blesh White was practically a household name. Scuff one against a curb. This is where those curb feelers earned their keep, and you'd wince like you'd scratch the dining table. Budget-minded folks even bought clip-on white wall trim rings to fake the look. Black wall tires and alloy wheels took over as a sporty European look swept in during the 80s, and today, white walls survive only on classics and hot rods. But a freshly scrubbed set on a Sunday morning. And that was pride you could see from across the street. Points, plugs, and the tune-up ritual. Cars in the 70s didn't just get oil changes, they got tune-ups, and they needed them constantly. Inside the distributor sat a set of ignition points, little mechanical contacts that wore down and drifted out of adjustment, and every 10,000 or 12,000 miles you were due, new points, new condenser, new spark plugs gapped with a feeler gauge, maybe a distributor cap and rotor. Shade tree mechanics did it themselves in the driveway on Saturday with a dwell meter and a timing light, the engine idling while Dad squinted at the strobe-lit timing marks. A car that was down on power or hard to start didn't need a computer scan, but needed points. Electronic ignition began rescuing everyone mid-decade, with Chrysler making it standard in 1973, and GM's HEI arriving in 1975, stretching tune-up intervals dramatically. Today's cars run 100,000 miles on a set of plugs, and nobody knows what a dwell meter is. But that timing light glow in the garage, that was Saturday, the 55 mph limit and the 85 mph speedometer. In January 1974, in the teeth of the fuel crisis, the national 55-mile-per-hour speed limit became law, and the Great American Highway slowed to a crawl. Cars built for effortless 75-mile-per-hour cruising now droned along at double nickels, and drivers hated every minute of it. Sammy Hagar eventually turned the frustration into an anthem. Washington doubled down at the end of the decade. A federal rule required new car speedometers to read no higher than 85 miles per hour, with 55 specially highlighted, on the theory that a lower number would discourage speeding. So the 70s driver lived with a speedometer that pretended his 400 cubic inch sedan couldn't outrun a school bus. Enforcement bred the CB radio boom, radar detectors like the Fuzzbuster, and a national cat and mouse game with Smokey. The 85 mile per hour speedometer rule was scrapped in the early 80s, and the 55 limit finally died in 1995. But double nickels, that phrase still makes a certain generation roll their eyes. Opera windows. Few styling touches scream mid-70s personal luxury like the opera window. That small, usually fixed pane set into the rear roof pillar, often framed in chrome and paired with a padded landau top. The 1975 Chrysler Cordoba wore them beautifully alongside its fine Corinthian leather, and the Ford Thunderbird, Lincoln Continental Mark IV, and Chevrolet Monte Carlo all joined the club. Some cars dressed theirs up further with louvers, coach lamps mounted beside them, or even oval porthole shapes. Did they serve a purpose? Barely. Visibility through them was mostly symbolic, and the thick pillars around them created blind spots you could hide a truck in. But purpose wasn't the point. The opera window said this was not mere transportation. This was a personal luxury coupe, and you were somebody. By the mid-'80s, aerodynamic styling wiped the opera window off the map almost overnight. It remains one of those features that instantly dates a car to within about 8 years and instantly warms the heart of anyone who drove one. Hidden headlights. Flip a switch after dark in the right 70s car and the front end came alive. Panels rotated or doors lifted, and the headlights emerged like the car was opening its eyes. Hidden headlamps were pure theater, and the 70s had them everywhere. The Lincoln Continental Mark IV and Mark V with their grand concealed lamps, the Buick Riviera, the Olds Toronado, the Dodge Charger, and later the Firebird Trans Am with its low, sinister look. The mechanisms were vacuum operated on many cars, which led to the era's most familiar quirk, the wink. A leaky vacuum line meant one headlight door drooped or refused to open, leaving your majestic luxury coupe squinting at the world like it had just woken up. Owners learned the fix, or learned to love the wink. Pop-up lights carried the torch into the sports cars of the 80s and 90s before pedestrian safety standards ended them for good. No modern LED signature will ever match the drama of a car opening its eyes, full-size spares, and bumper jacks. When you got a flat in the 70s, and with the tires of the day you got flats, the trunk held a real full-size spare tire on a matching wheel, not today's skinny temporary donut. Changing it, however, meant facing the most terrifying tool Detroit ever supplied, the bumper jack. You slotted a tall ratcheting post under the chrome bumper, cranked the long handle, and watched 2 tons of Oldsmobile rise swaying gently on a single skinny column. Everybody knew somebody with a story of a car slipping off one, and the instructions said never get under the car for excellent reasons. But it worked roadside in the rain for millions of people, and dads treated teaching the routine as a rite of passage before handing over the keys. Space saver spares began appearing in the late 70s as trunks shrank and automakers chased weight savings, and scissor jacks replaced the Widowmaker. Be honest, did you ever actually trust that bumper jack, or did you hold your breath the whole time? Let us know down below. Lidded gas and the switch to unlidded, and finally, the fuel itself. For decades, gasoline came with tetrethyl lead in it. It boosted octane and cushioned engine valves, and pumps offered regular and high-test ethyl, a name straight out of the era. Then came 1975. New cars arrived with catalytic converters to meet clean air rules, and lead destroyed a catalyst instantly. So unleaded gas appeared at the pump. New cars got smaller fuel filler necks that only the skinny unleaded nozzle could enter, and a great national standoff began. Unleaded cost a few cents more, so more than a few drivers pried open those restrictors or used adapter funnels to sneak cheap leaded fuel into their new cars, ruining their converters and eventually facing the smog check. Old-timers swore their engines needed lead and bought additives for years. Leaded gas for cars was finally phased out entirely in the 90s, and the science says removing it was one of the great public health wins of the century. But every 70s driver remembers standing at the pump making that choice. If you enjoyed this, tell us in the comments what you'd like us to cover next. We've already got a long list, but the best ideas come from you. Most likes go straight onto it. Subscribe so you're here when it lands.